Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, Commentary Magazine contributing editor, Big Cheese podcast host, YouTube host for the Foundation of the Defense of Democracies, Jonathan Schanzer. Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, John.
Poor Jonathan is in a Hilton Garden Inn in New Jersey where the coffee is terrible, so we're going to try to cheer him up by just laying out a quick scenario about what's going on in Lebanon, which should make everybody except Mehdi Hassan happy. So Israel starts out by exploding the pagers. Then people have to go from the pagers to the walkie-talkies. So it explodes the walkie-talkies. Then they have to meet in person since they can no longer communicate. They have to go to some central location. They must have said, this is where we go if everything goes to hell. And they all go to a central location, and Israel hits the central location and kills multiple Hezbollah leaders, has been picking them off over the course of the last week. And according at least to one thing that I heard on Dan Senor's podcast with Nadav Eyal, Israeli military commanders believe that they did more damage in 6 hours on Monday than they did in 34 days in Lebanon in 2006, hitting launchers, hitting rockets, and that sort of thing. An amazingly successful operation so far. So Jonathan Schanzer, as our resident expert on all things of these matters, does this narrative that I have just laid out for you conform to reality? And are you part of the camp, just to follow up, that says, wow, this is going great, and they got a plan, they're going to get Iran to get Hezbollah to pull back before any really major military operations have to happen? Or are you part of they had to do this fast because the pager plan had been exposed, and so they did it too fast, and they've had a lot of successes, but they have no plan and they don't know where to go now, and in the classic I would say Jewish fashion are taking lemonade and turning them into lemons. So where do you come on this spectrum?
I hate to say it, but I'm non-binary here. I refuse to be pushed into this binary choice. I think it's a combination of both. But first, I think we just need to set some terms, John, because when we just talk about the pager operation, there's just so many creative ways of describing it. My favorite so far has been Operation Castration, but I'm open to other descriptions of that operation. It was ingenious. It was apparently years in the making. The same with the walkie-talkies. Obviously, the targets that Israel has been hitting, they're the result of pinpoint intelligence, a target bank that Israel has been collecting over the last 2 decades, which is, this is nothing to sneeze at here. They have spent a long time studying Hezbollah, studying where they keep their rockets, the rocket launchers, studying the top leaders, and they're slowly picking them apart. I will agree with you that I think this was done hastily. I think the pager operation was thrust upon the Israelis because apparently someone began to realize that this operation was in fact something that was feasible. The Israelis were alerted to the fact that either they were going to be discovered or that the 0 days exploit with the pagers was about to be patched. It's not exactly clear what happened there, but the Israelis had to move quickly. Once they started to move quickly, you began to hear people in the Israeli security establishment say, okay, fine, that was good, but now what are you doing strategically? And that was kind of the knock on the Bibi government for the first couple of days after the pagers started going boom. And then I think you began to see the rest of the establishment begin to scramble and realize, hey, they can't communicate. Hey, they are in panic. They're not even willing to pick up their cell phones because they're afraid that something might happen to them. This is the moment to strike. And so we're seeing this wider operation take place. I think that it's going to set Hezbollah back significantly. I think there's no way around that. And I think that what you heard on Dan Senor's podcast is absolutely correct. But, and here's where I need to sort of fall between the two camps that you've laid out here. Hezbollah still has 200,000 or so missiles and rockets and drones that they're able to fire into Israel. We saw a ballistic missile get fired into Israel overnight around midnight our time, around 6 a.m. in Israel. They're trying to hit the Mossad headquarters. Kibbutz Sar suffered a direct hit today. And I think there's a lot more where that came from. So as productive as this has been, we can't lose sight of the fact that Hezbollah is a formidable terrorist organization that is equal in power roughly to that of a mid-sized European country in terms of the armaments that they have in their possession and the skills that they have as well. So this is still going to be a tough slog. I think Hezbollah is definitely licking its wounds. I think Iran is fearful of what could happen next, knowing that they could be targeted with similar pinpoint intelligence-driven operations. So the Israelis are reestablishing deterrence here bit by bit. But where we go from here, a lot of questions still.
So I was on the phone last night at midnight with my sister, Ruthie Bloom, whom many of you probably know as a commentator on matters in Israel, lives in Tel Aviv. She had just come back from her hallway where she had entered in the middle of the night, having heard sirens that woke her up, indicating that there was an incoming. Here's what her report was. Her report was that she heard the sirens, but she never heard the boom, which is to say that when Iron Dome goes up, or not in this case, it was a ballistic missile. It probably wasn't Iron Dome. It was
David Sling,
David Sling.
Yep.
That you wait to you can actually hear the interception. If there's a significant interception, she never heard it, thus indicating to her that the missile was really not in all that close to where she is geographically. Israel does not wish anyone to know where these missiles land or are fired, though, and they tell people not to go outside and take iPhone videos like Israelis are going to listen. They don't want to help Hezbollah with its targeting, that sort of thing. But not just there, but over the last couple of days, barrages all over the center of the country, Netanya, elsewhere, and I think the most important salient detail for people who are listening is that the reserves are being called up very significantly. So I have a couple of family members who are men in their mid to late 30s who are being called up this weekend. They don't know where they're going. They don't know what they're doing. Presumably, they're probably in logistical or replacement support, which is to say that they're going to move the active military north, potentially to prepare for a ground assault on Lebanon, and they need people to take the jobs that they have to leave in the south or around Hamas. So two questions arise from this. Is Israel now, because of the what appears to be the almost complete degradation of Hamas's offensive capabilities, does it have the luxury, let us say, of engaging in the Second Front War in Lebanon without degrading its role in trying to clean up and finish up the war in Gaza? Or is this a threat to the Gaza operation, in your estimation?
Look, I think, and I wrote about this for a commentary, I think it was September 12th. I think Hamas is largely a spent force. I don't want to say that we're not going to see fighting in Gaza, because I think we're likely going to see some kind of low-level insurgency that could go on for quite some time while Israel tries to find the right combination of actors to help rebuild the place. There's going to be guys in tracksuits and AK-47s that are going to come out of the woodwork, and they're going to be firing on Israeli soldiers. I think that's a foregone conclusion. But in terms of the hard fighting, the need for systems and large ground maneuvers and columns of tanks and things like that, I think we may be actually nearing the end here. Again, the end of the hard fighting, not the end of the sort of smaller battles that I would suspect will last for quite some time. I'm hearing the same things about folks getting called up to the north. Here's where I am on the north right now. I think Israel faces two primary impediments, and they're very interconnected. The first is whether Israel has the munitions that they need for a ground invasion. I continue to hear that, I hear different things from different people, but they need tank shells. They need, small diameter bombs that they can use. They need mortars. They need the sorts of things that are needed for.
Is any of that, just a quick question, is any of that a result of a country withholding anything?
So that's the second thing that's interrelated, and that's exactly it, right? What we're seeing right now is a Biden administration, or let's just say a Biden-Harris administration, a White House that is extremely reticent. They have been very fearful of this war in the North. By the way, as have I. This is not a war that anybody should be looking forward to. And I know there are a lot of people right now who are spiking the football in the end zone, talking about how great Israel's performing, but just remember, they're still, Hezbollah's capabilities are still, they can still fire 4,000 plus rockets a day into Israel, saturating Israeli airspace, forcing Israel to expend Iron Dome batteries. This is not a good thing. And then there's the other added complexity, which is the Biden administration doesn't want to hand over the 2,000-pound bombs that are going to be needed to destroy some of that Hezbollah infrastructure. They don't want Israel going on the offensive. You're really watching right now, kind of a blitz at the UN and in the U.S. media where, Biden and Blinken and Amos Hochstein and others are telling the Israelis that they're the ones who are escalating. I think the implied threat here is that we may see the U.S. withhold whatever weapons we even have. And it's unclear what we can replenish and what we can't. I continue to hear different things there as well. But this is, I think, for me, the main concern is that if Israel does this and they're doing it against the wishes of the Biden administration heading into, the sort of throes of a U.S. election season, and the Biden administration decides to make this an issue of, they're saying that Israel's escalating, which, of course, is just ridiculous when you consider that Hezbollah has been waging this war since October 8th. They've fired 8,000 missiles and UAVs and rockets into Israel. They've cleared 150,000 some people out of their homes in the northern communities. Israel has been remarkably patient. They have listened to the Biden administration. They have heeded the warnings. But there came a moment, whether it was precipitated by this 0 days capability that Israel had to use or lose, or whether it was a decision that Hamas was sufficiently weakened, or maybe it was a decision based on Hezbollah's force posture. Whatever it is, and I've heard lots of different reasons for why Israel has decided to push and to seize the initiative in the north. Whatever it is, I think the Israelis have shown remarkable patience here. And now my concern is whether the administration has any patience for Israel.
So, that's the geopolitical question that is raised by this moment in time, that history being contingent and the fact that the possible exposure of the 0 days capability led to a more precipitous beginning of this counteroffensive, which, although we have to say, it's not really that precipitous. I mean, what's precipitous is the mass nature of what happened. Obviously, Israel has been picking off Hezbollah leaders for the last two, not just Hamas leaders. We know about Hania being assassinated in Tehran, but the deputy commander of Hezbollah is like the drummer in This Is Spinal Tap. You do not want to be named the deputy commander of Hezbollah because 3 days later you will be dead. I think there have been 4 in the last 2 months. I'm not joking. It's like, no, pass this cup from my lips, please, because it appears that Israel has almost 100% penetration into or can see inside Hezbollah, knows where everybody is, and seems to be able to make choices almost at will to do these targeted assassinations, and that's got to be scaring the Allah out of them. Would me, and of course that also has a powerful psychological component. Meanwhile, Israel is also ensuring that it does not face another front in its immediate geographical vicinity by mounting operations in the West Bank, which, again, we have more crocodile tear geschrying over. Israel is leveling buildings in Jenin. It's amazing that Israel has allowed Jenin even to remain standing somehow, but nonetheless, Israel is leveling buildings in Jenin. No, just for the hell of it. They have nothing else to do. They're not fighting in Gaza. They're not in Lebanon. They're just rolling over buildings in Jenin like they really want to be in doing military operations in the West Bank right now. They're doing them obviously because they're trying to forestall another front, or they know that there are command, control, and communications connections between whoever is in the West Bank and whoever is in Lebanon, and they're trying to they've found out who's working for Hezbollah in the Palestinian Authority-controlled West Bank, and they are taking them out as well. But we have this, New York Times world in which any Israeli military action seems to be directly targeted at a Palestinian baby, no matter where it is. There was, by the way, a fantastic piece of footage on Twitter, one of these famous Pallywood things where the Palestinians set up videos to show the horrors of war, and this guy was holding his son who was dead. And, he was crying over his dead son, and then his dead son got an itch on his side and picked up his arm and started to scratch his stomach because it was itching, and the guy burst into laughter. I wish I'll see if I can find it and put it on my Twitter feed so people can see it. But I mean, that is, classic, just defaulting to the classic Palestinian.
That's the Palestinian version of stage parenting, right? We have toddlers and tiaras in America.
Yeah.
And they have the Pallywood training.
Well, at least this guy had the good sense to crack up at and carefully stage this. And then his son starts scratching himself. Okay, nonetheless,
as long as we're on Gaza, I want to ask Jonathan a question here. Speculation about Sinwar's whereabouts and condition,
sure,
and its significance.
Yeah. So look, first, I just want to tip my hat to John for making a Spinal Tap reference. Anytime we can do that in foreign policy, it's just an added bonus. So this one goes to 11. Thank you. I would also, I would just note just quickly before we pivot away from Lebanon, the killing of those Radwan forces the other day, the senior commanders of Radwan after the Beeper operations, was a significant achievement for Israel because they've been so afraid of another 10-7 attack being mounted, a ground attack, right? With those people gone, I think it does give Israel some breathing room, and it's actually reduced the threat level, at least from the ground, which is
Can you stop for a second and describe what you're talking about with Radwan and the potential ground invasion? Where they would come in, what the idea is that they interfered with.
So what you need to understand is on 10/7, the Hamas Nukba forces, as they're called, they were the ones that came in. They led the charge initially, and they were trained by the Iranians in, urban warfare, guerrilla warfare, and they had specific skill sets that enabled them to do what they did. Killing Israeli forces, killing and capturing Israeli civilians. The Radwan forces, I arguably are superior to the Nukba guys, right? These are guys that have been highly trained. They're considered to be, really, truly special forces. They have tunnels that potentially snake into Israel or near the entrance to the border with Israel. They have spots where they've already identified that they're going to cross over the border. They're going to breach the fence. And the idea was to literally go in and conquer Israeli towns in the north and plant that yellow Hezbollah flag. And it would be a disaster for Israel, that they would lose territory, sort of like what's already happened to some extent, because they've lost it because people have left. But it's another thing to have Hezbollah there planting the flag and conquering territory and making Israel fight to win it back. That was the plan. And from what I can tell, the Radwan forces are now in complete disarray. And that is a very good thing for Israel. That's an achievement here. It's not, it's another battle won, not a war won, but a battle won here in this long fight that Israel is going to have to wage. And as a result of that, plus the walkie-talkies and the pagers and the other targeted strikes, I would argue that Israel is right now living in Hassan Nasrallah's head rent-free. I mean, he is just absolutely wonderful.
Nasrallah is the head of Hezbollah.
Correct. The Secretary General of
Right,
Israel.
yes.
So that's what's happening there. And I just think it's important that we understand what Israel has achieved. Then there's the question that Abe raises, which is, has Israel achieved something else? And there, I don't know how to answer it. We've been hearing in the Israeli media for the last several days that Yahya Sinwar, the now consolidated chief of Hamas, who took over both the political and military wings, such as they are, after Ismail Haniyeh's killing in the heart of Tehran in a Mossad plot back in late July, that he's been running Hamas from the tunnels of Gaza, that he's underground and still trying to run the entire organization, with minimal oxygen and no vitamin D. He apparently may have been targeted in an Israeli airstrike. That was at least the intent. They thought they might have tried to get him. It's unclear whether they have gotten him, but as of a couple of days ago, we were hearing that he was incommunicado from the other top people that were in his inner circle. Now, incommunicado for him is a bit strange because, this is a guy that's not been using cell phones. He doesn't want to use electronic devices because he's afraid that the Israelis are going to be able to track him. So he's been apparently, whispering things in people's ears and messages that will be sent onward. He's writing things down on paper, little notes that are going to be handed to others who can then share his thoughts with other Hamas leaders. So, it's hard to know whether they got him or not, but apparently there's just been less evidence of communication, or perhaps even no evidence of his communication, at least as of a few days ago. That story's kind of left the headlines, and so it could just be that, it didn't amount to anything. I will just say that some of my best contacts in Israel have cast some doubt on this report, but look, I wouldn't dismiss it entirely. I think there's still a chance that they get him, because there are fewer and fewer Hamas leaders to target right now. The Israelis are able to really focus their fire for the first time, given the major achievements that they've notched on the Gaza battlefield.
And in Lebanon, something struck me about the other day watching Twitter. One was a series of tweets showing people fleeing the south, which is in contrast to Gaza, where Hamas can actually prevent Palestinians from going anywhere. Hezbollah doesn't and can't and won't stop them from leaving South Lebanon or, Beirut or the entire area. And the other was complaints about Hezbollah. Now, people in Gaza complain about Hamas and stuff like that too, but the combination of them struck me. Is Hezbollah have they bitten off more than they can chew in terms of the local population? Hamas has the local population in Gaza penned in, right? They also can't go to Egypt. They have them under full control. Hezbollah has its part of the state, but people are angry that Hezbollah would start a war and not protect them and not, and they would have to flee or whatever. And also Lebanon is so sectarian that it makes a difference if you're Shiite or Sunni or not Muslim at all, right? And all of that. So because of the power sharing thing. So my question is does Hezbollah really have the domestic support to continue a fight of this size?
I love this question. By the way, I hate your Yankees hat, but I love the question. Look, what I will just say is well, maybe a couple of things to point out. Number one, Gaza was run like the Taliban. Right. And I think people don't quite realize this, that the truly autocratic nature, the repressive nature, the anti-Christian, anti-gay, anti-everything. Right. I mean, any divergence from Sunni orthodoxy was absolutely not just frowned upon, but oppressed by the Sunni Hamas regime. And so people lived in constant fear. The people who were even suspected of collaborating with Israel, as we've all seen, they're tied to a rope and attached to a motorcycle and people dragged through the streets, just a culture of fear that was instilled in Gaza over the course of 2 decades almost. I think it's really hard to overstate what Hamas did to the people there. What you see in Lebanon is something quite different. There is still a liberal culture. You've got that Beirut cafe set, right? You've got liberals that are openly critical of Hezbollah and they want to live a normal life. And then there is this state within a state that is run by Hezbollah, and that is there's no bringing that down. Right? There's no way to actually undermine it. They are too strong. They're stronger than the Lebanese armed forces. They're stronger than this. There is no government. There is no state. Hezbollah has hollowed out the economy. They've hollowed out the politics. But the people are still there and they're grumpy. They remember 2006. They remember the billions of dollars of damage that Hezbollah wrought. They remember the thousands of people that were killed or injured as a result of a war that Hezbollah brought upon the people of Lebanon, brought upon themselves in the service of Iran. And that's not lost on anyone. People still remember the port blast from just a couple of years ago, which is largely believed to be a Hezbollah it was a Hezbollah problem that they were storing ammonium nitrate and the whole thing went boom and destroyed, city blocks of Beirut, the entire port of Beirut. So people are really still very unhappy about what is happening. And so there are still these voices and you'll see them on TV. And it's not just this sort of sectarian thing. It's just a cultural thing within Lebanon. And it's a really interesting dichotomy. One of the things that we've been watching right now at FTD is this really interesting question of the casualties and the way that this war is going to be described in the media. And people are immediately jumping on this thing like, well, it's the Gaza Ministry of Health all over again when the Lebanese government starts reporting on the deaths or the casualties. And it's really interesting. The guy that is in charge of the ministry, the government entity that is supposed to be reporting these, a Sunni guy who is purportedly anti-Hezbollah. Does that mean we can trust him? Probably not. Does it mean that he's as corrupt as the Gaza Health Ministry? Also, probably not. But we're in it's apples and oranges here, and we're gonna have to be dealing with a very different culture of people who are going to have their own grievances about this war. And yes, they're going to be blaming Israel without question. They're going to be pointing at Israeli aggression or atrocities, but they also know at the same time that this was brought upon them by Hezbollah. The question is, how brave will they be about criticizing Hezbollah once this war starts or presses?
Let me take a break to tell everybody within the ambit of my voice about the Competitive Enterprise Institute's How the World Works. It's podcast featuring one of my close friends, favorite political commentators, unorthodox thinker, polymath, Kevin Williamson. Each episode of How the World Works, Kevin sits down with a notable guest to discuss the jobs they've had, why work matters, and the role of work in our social lives. After all, work involves a lot more than paychecks cashed. So listen to How the World Works wherever you listen to podcasts, or visit cei.org/podcasts. All right, let's talk about the United States and its reaction to what's going on here. The United States positioned two aircraft carrier groups on the off the Lebanese shore in the aftermath of October 7th to work to ensure that Hezbollah did not begin a second front war against Israel in the north. One of the gestures that led many of us to praise and be grateful for the Biden administration's intervention in the war in the first 6 or 7 weeks of the war seemed like a very, very useful thing. Show of force, show of support, show of an effort to create stability and to use the American projection of power to warn Iran against any recklessness that Iran might wish to pursue in relation to this unprecedented situation that Israel had fallen into. And here we are with 6 weeks left to go until the election, and the candidate for president has one thing to say about the Middle East, which is we need a ceasefire deal to bring the hostages home and create a Palestinian state. All three of these goals that have been stated in relation to the Gaza problem are, as we know, not really germane to the situation in the north. I suppose it would be great if a ceasefire could be achieved with Hezbollah. In fact, that is what Israel wants. Israel is not seeking to expand the war. Everything Israel is doing here is to get Hezbollah to back off, to go quiet, to calm down, and to go away, and to let Israelis come back to the north. Whether that can be done without a greater degree of intervention is really the fundamental question facing Israel's military and political leadership, that it can't be safe until Hezbollah is really, in some sense, not really neutralized. It's too big, it's too strong, it's too powerful, it's too central to Iran's military structure for it to evanesce the way actually Hamas may be evanescing. But you can certainly reestablish deterrence by saying we're here, we're not going anywhere. You stick your head up and you're a deputy commander of Hezbollah and you're going to be dead. And so maybe you don't want to really have a lot of commanders, and you guys just take some of those missiles home, or we're going to keep bombing the sites. We're not going to come in on the ground, all of that. So I don't know. They're still going to say ceasefire. And I suppose Israel will say, great, Amos Hochstein, go. You're a wonderful guy, Amos Hochstein, negotiator with Lebanon. Go right ahead. Go to Nasrallah. Tell them what the terms are. The terms are go away. Cover your missiles. Take the warheads off the launchers. Israel's willing to stand down. Believe me, they got other troubles that they need to face. I suppose I could keep saying it, but let's say that doesn't work, and it's October 15th. And Israel feels like it has no choice because they keep firing ballistic missiles at Tel Aviv the way they did last night, that it actually has to go and enforce on the ground in order to disable the things that they can't get from the air, which is why they would go in on the ground. They don't want to they're not going to engage in, hand-to-hand martial combat with Hezbollah fighters. That's not the model here. Is there any indication that the United States has an understanding that it is in the U.S. interest for Israel once again to actually prevail against Hezbollah?
No, come on. I mean, really, seriously.
Well, I'm just asking. I'm just asking questions.
You threw me a softball and I bunted. But look,
Take your time, Jonathan. Think about it if you're not sure.
Right. But I mean, first let's just understand what's going on here. Iran is waging a 7-front war against Israel, and their goal is nothing short of the eradication of Israel. They want to fully destroy Israel. Israel, in response, is actually they want to destroy they haven't said it outwardly anyway, that they want to destroy Hezbollah or they want to, conquer Lebanon, right? What they want is they want to be able to live within the borders that they have in peace and security. They need Hezbollah to get out of southern Lebanon. They need to get all those missiles and rockets out. That's their war aim here. But if they continue to be pushed, then they're going to have to take more drastic action. And that will mean potentially the dismantling of Hezbollah as we know it, just as we saw the dismantling of Hamas as we know it. This administration doesn't seem to understand even that. And I think it's very basic to understand here. If you listen to the rhetoric, if you see the sort of military formations, if you see Israel's responses and Iran's aggression and Hezbollah's aggression, you can see this quite clearly. This administration simply doesn't want a war now, right? It's too soon before the election. They don't like the optics of this. They don't like how this is going to play within the Democratic base, the woke left, whatever it is that they're worried about. They're deeply concerned about how this could escalate and what it means if they end up supporting Israel, even though they, I think, in their heart of hearts, understand that they have very little choice in the matter. But this is, look, I mean, we've talked about this before on this podcast. I mean, they don't want Ukraine firing back into Russia because they're afraid of escalation. And this actually gets to a really good piece that my colleague Behnam Ben Taleblu wrote for The Hill the other day. This idea of de-escalation without deterrence. It's just simply not possible. Not with the Iranian regime, not with Putin, probably not with China. You need to be able to demonstrate strength in order to be able to get to de-escalation. If you cannot deter and you cannot flex those muscles, bare your teeth, growl a little bit, and inspire even a little bit of fear with these malign actors, you're not going to get the de-escalation that you so desire. And that, I think, is just this huge disconnect right now with the Biden administration.
I think it's such an important point. It's similar to something I wrote recently in my piece about American policy in Ukraine. I think there's a fear in this administration, and it's widespread, I think, in Democratic and Republican circles now, when it comes to foreign policy, which is they're not even just afraid of war or averse to war. They're steering away from the very idea of clarity on foreign policy issues because that locks them into things that they have to stick to, that comes with consequences that they don't want to deal with. So there's this instinct to sort of throw up a fog and be kind of here and be kind of there and push for, and in some sense, Kamala Harris's ridiculous answers about this stuff is the perfect distillation of what they're really going on about.
Can I just say, Abe, I love that comment. Primarily because, when Trump took office, we heard the knock on him was that he was the first post-policy president of the United States, that he didn't actually need a policy, that he could sort of muddle his way through and he could change things by tweet overnight and foreign policy would change. And look, there was something to that. But I don't see a whole lot of difference between that and operating in this weird gray zone, which is what we've been watching out of the Biden administration and the vice president right now, where they refuse to take a particular position. No, they're not tweeting things overnight and changing anything, but what they're doing is they're leaving everything in doubt, right? We have no idea what it is that they plan to do to support their allies. We have no idea what they're going to do to challenge their enemies. They're just leaving everything open to interpretation from their supporters and their detractors. And this is, I think, a huge problem across the spectrum right now in American foreign policy.
I think that we have to look at this in terms of a prefix. And that prefix are the two letters D and E. Duh, right? D. Democratic Party's policies, domestically and internationally, involve attaching the prefix to many different things. De-escalation, deconfliction. Deconfliction is a term that is used to describe conflicts or moments of real confrontation between two parties in the domestic United States that, could lead to some terrible two gangs, right? Cops and gangs in Chicago, something like that. What's needed is a deconfliction expert to come in and figure out how to turn down the temperature. How do you lower the temperature, deconflict? You know what else is D? Defund. Defund the police. D this, D that. What is it? This is the withdrawal. D is withdrawing. D is pull back. Pull back before things go too far. And as you say, the word deterrence, though it begins with the letters DE, that is not the prefix. And in all of these cases, you are eliminating as a necessary adjunct to all efforts to retard, to end violence, to restore order. You are avoiding the necessity of the stick, of the threat, of the you don't do this and you're going to jail, or you're going to get bombed, or you're going to get overthrown, or we're going to support your adversaries. And I think this is something that actually brings together the entirety of this democratic policy view relating to the very difficult questions that are raised by human nature and power imbalances and people who want to use force in whatever capacity to control or contain or whatever. And it is Kamala Harris may be the perfect post everything president for this worldview, because she lived through no war. I mean, she lived through the Iraq War, whatever. She did not grow up in a wartime footing. She does not come from a military family. She grew up in Canada. She all of these qualities that she possesses that do not say to her, as they say to Biden, as they, in some ways they even said to Obama, because Obama's policy on Iran was, I'm going to go against deterrence. I am rejecting deterrence. I'm not like avoiding deterrence. I'm rejecting deterrence in favor of cooperation. And she has no policy except we're going to unilaterally try not to make trouble, and maybe that'll work to get you to make less trouble. Because if we don't make trouble and you don't make trouble, and then maybe we can be friends, or even if we can't be friends, at least we're not directly in conflict with each other. And therefore, Israel is an incredible irritant to this worldview, because it tried it. It gave it a shot. It's given it a shot here and there, this deconfliction, or whatever you might want to call it, efforts with the Palestinians. And it just can't afford it. And then when it lets its guard down, October 7th happens. And so the world of deconfliction and de-escalation, the fact that de-escalation is being used to describe a war, or escalation, therefore requiring de-escalation, is used to describe a war that has been going on for 11 and a half months, that Israel really only joined in last week. It's a little like Britain and the Nazis, in the sense that Britain was sitting there and the Nazis, started bombing London. And the British did try to respond. I mean, they went to France, didn't go well. Eventually they did. But I mean, it would be like saying, when the British Expeditionary Force went to France, that it was escalating with France.
There's even, I mean, there's been some reporting along those lines this week that suggest that, and maybe this is 12-dimensional chess type thinking, but that one of the reasons that Israel is not telling the United States about some of the things it's doing is not necessarily because it's worried about leaks, but because it strengthens their hand in a way that the U.S. is supposed to be playing good cop, bad cop. The U.S. is supposed to be saying, "Look, I deal with us. We're nice. I don't know how long I can hold off the rabid dog of the Zionist entity any longer. These guys are there's only so much I can do to stop them, but let's try to make peace or whatever." And the U.S. isn't doing the good cop role. So Israel is forced to do things in a way that prove to its enemies that there's no one holding it back, because the U.S. doesn't even know about these things, right? They're introducing the kind of Nixonian crazy man, right, idea, which is that nobody knows what they're going to do next, literally.
Yeah.
And that, anyway, that's a suggestion that people have been making strategically recently. And I mean,
I think there's something of that in Ukraine's going into Kursk as well, without consulting the U.S. beforehand. It's a very similar thing, because both countries are irritants to this worldview, and that they can't afford not to have clarity. For them, that's automatic extinction.
I mean, Zelensky at the UN yesterday said Russia can only be brought to the negotiating table by force. It's not that we don't want to go to the negotiating table. Obviously, this war will end in the way Ukraine wants it if there is a negotiation with Russia. It's a question of when it happens, under what circumstances, under what conditions, and what brings Russia to the table.
I think, by the way, John, I think it's great that we're bringing Russia and Ukraine into this. I think, there've been, growing numbers of commentators that are beginning to realize that there's a growing problem around the world, right? You got Russia and Ukraine, you got Iran and all of its proxies against Israel. You got China potentially with its eye on Taiwan, tensions between North and South Korea. There's a global there's a global conflict. I don't want to, I think it's obviously premature to say it's a world war, and I don't want to say world war, but let's just say things are worse right now than we've seen them in a while in terms of all these various conflicts. What is needed right now for the U.S. is to actually be unafraid to wield the credible threat of force. That is the only way that diplomacy works. It has to be backed up with the fear on the other side that the U.S. could escalate in and of itself, right? They can decide they want to turn up the pressure on some of these countries, that they can as a result of their aggression. That is what has been missing from the Biden administration for the last 3 years. It was what was missing during the Obama years. And the longer we limp along in this way, the more our enemies and adversaries are going to be emboldened, that are going to be willing to take these sorts of risks. And there's only one way to arrest that, and it is something that I think this administration is deeply ambivalent about.
I mean, this dates back to Plato, and I'm not being pretentious here. In Plato's laws, Plato originated the philosophy that came to be known in Latin as si vis pacem para bellum. If you want to make peace, prepare for war. Brought forward into the 20th century by Ronald Reagan, saying trust but verify, right? You can have you cannot.
Peace through superior firepower.
Yeah, you cannot assume that peace is not the natural condition of human nature. War may not be the natural condition, but conflict, or the desire to lord thing one over the other, and that all other worldviews are fantasy. And sometimes they're fantasy based on deep conviction that may be wrong-headed, but is actually, very passionate. Certain type of pacifism, certain type of Christian pacifism, let's say. And then sometimes it's fantasy based on ostrich-like unwillingness to sort of look at the things in front of you and say, okay, well, I have these three choices and I don't have a fourth. And I got to do 1, 2, or 3. And each of them has an unappetizing element to it. And the question is, what has the likelihood for the best outcome for me? Or you can say, no, I'm just going to bury my head in the sand and hope everything goes well. And, that we are in the year 2024 and we have a presidential race in which I believe the leading candidate for president in the Democratic Party, or the leading candidate for president right now, if you're in the national polls, is likely unaware of the value or the historical integrity of the idea that you have to, if you want peace, you prepare for war. And that what's going on with Israel and Lebanon is actually preparation for war. That's, even though people are dying, even though the pagers went off, even though they're bombing and shelling the war, this is preparation for war. This is not the war. This is we can stop now. We are giving you a taste of how bad this can be for you. We can stop now.
Take the off-ramp. That is what they're
Right.
trying to say to Hezbollah right now.
Right.
Climb
Take
down from that tree.
the off-ramp. And it is weird that we have an administration that does not really understand that. And its idea is to tell has been for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, has been to tell the Israelis to take an off-ramp, and the off-ramp was blown up. Like, they can't go on that off-ramp. It collapsed like the bridge in Baltimore, and they can't drive across it anymore. They have to rebuild the off-ramp in order to take it. And that means making sure that the people who blew it up in the first place can't set charges on it again and blow it up when they're standing on it a second time. Just to close the circle, having done this almost entire conversation on foreign policy, we should say that the other interesting, we haven't even barely mentioned Iran. Donald Trump is now making explicit, as part of his campaign in the last 6 weeks, that not only has he been the subject of 2 assassination attempts, one of them, very nearly successful, but that the administration acknowledges, he's been briefed, we've been told, they've reported that Iran is actively seeking his assassination. Nation of Iran is seeking the active assassination of the former president of the United States and current, one of the 2 people who will be the next president of the United States. And I don't know if they're going to go face to face. This is something that Trump can make Harris answer for. But what are you going to do about the fact that Iran is targeting a former president and current presidential candidate? You guys have been screaming for 8 years about this non-existent plot to control Trump from Moscow. Fine, you can even believe that plot exists. There is no ambiguity about the question of whether or not Iran is trying to assassinate Trump. So what are you going to do about it is a question that Kamala Harris needs to answer. Because, there are other ex-presidents. Now, I don't see why Iran would want to assassinate Barack Obama. But, it could want to assassinate Biden. And other actors could want to do it. What on earth is going on here when one of the leading candidates is not engaging with the issue that one of the world's leading destabilizers and absolutely addicted to the use of extraterritorial force is targeting one of the leading figures in the United States?
John, I'll just add, it's bad enough, of course, that they're targeting the, 45th president of the United States, possibly the 47th. But then on top of that, we know from the director of the Office of National Intelligence, from Avril Haines, that Iran has been sponsoring the chaos that we've been watching on campus. We know from various authorities within the U.S. government that Iran is engaging heavily in information operations and social media and beyond. They are trying to shape the political environment here in the United United States, not just through bumping off of one person, but through lots of other active measures that I think at some point, I think you're right. I mean, it needs to be acknowledged. I think, Trump came out with a statement, I guess it was this morning, where he made it very explicit what is going on. And I think that's going to mobilize at least parts of the country. But yeah, why is it that we're not seeing the White House mobilize on this? Why is it that they're not pushing back? If anything, right now, from what we heard the other day from Rafael Grossi from the International Atomic Energy Association, it sounds like we're about to start negotiating with the Iranians all over again on their nuclear program. This is insanity here, that we continue to engage rather than to punish. And that really is a lot of what's missing in that big picture that you've just started to sketch out.
Well, I want to reassure you that we hear that Kamala Harris will be interviewed tonight by Stephanie Ruhle of MSNBC. Lately, who's someone I like, acquaintance of mine, and I think is a lovely person, lately engaged in a colloquy on Bill Maher's show with Brett Stevens, in which she objected to Brett saying it would really be helpful if Kamala Harris clarified her positions on things, saying, this is not nirvana. We're not in nirvana here. We got two candidates. Trump cannot be allowed to win. Don't say anything or advocate any position that might impede Kamala Harris's journey into the White House. And that is the interview tonight. So, I'm sure she's going to ask her a tough question about Iran that could really clarify things. I'm really, really hopeful that is going to happen, and that she will do her job as a journalist and help America to make this decision about its presidency next month, or, in 6 weeks, whatever, with some assurance that they have any least frickin' clue what it is that she will do about anything. So,
will she have a teleprompter in this interview?
Yeah, she had one with Oprah, but that was a campaign event. There will be a teleprompter. The question is, what questions will be before Stephanie Ruhle?
But the answer to what the administration plans to do about the fact that there are assassination plots against at least one American president, Iranian assassination plots against one, the answer is, we're going to try to negotiate a new nuclear deal. That's their way of dealing with the Iranian threat. That's what they think will work.
That's one of the things that's really struck me about all this, is that you're supposed to feel when there is, unambiguously a desire on the part of a foreign actor to bring violence upon a leading figure in American politics, you're supposed to also react in a kind of instinctive patriotic way, which is like, that's an attack on America sort of thing. Not like Trump often says, hey, they're coming after you, I'm just in the way, or whatever, about criticizing, MAGA or some of his policy positions, which are, that's ridiculous. But literally, if their foreign nation is trying to assassinate the former president and the current, 50-50 shot at being the next president, that is something that is an attack on America, right? I mean, there should be a different feeling about all this swirling, and hinting violence and attempted violence in the presidential campaign, that should not just be about violence is bad and we should settle things at the ballot box, but we're under attack. The people who killed 3 servicemen and women in Jordan a couple of months ago, Americans that have been firing at Americans here and there and everywhere, are also trying to kill the president, and sort of creating this, almost like competition-like, fatwa-like atmosphere for it. And you don't see that. You don't see the like, hey, that's an attack on America. That's like, only I can tease my siblings. You can't say that about my brother, but I can, sort of thing. And you don't really have that kind of shared defensiveness over what kind of over this being an affront to America itself recently. And I find that to be a pretty dispiriting trend, where it's like it matters what party or how bad somebody is, to whether it gets the reaction that it's bad for an American president to be hunted.
Well, I wrote a blog post on at commentary.org right after the second attempt, called "The Assassination Wish Fulfillment," and I think this plays a role here, even though I don't think people really understand it. Much of the American elite and enormous tens of millions of people in the United States believe that Trump is a direct threat to the future of American democracy, and therefore news coming that people may be attempting to stop him from achieving the end of returning to the presidency does not ring as harshly on their ears as it might. And that this is a deep strain within human nature, which is, can someone rid me of this meddlesome priest? And with all such things, you are in the monkey's paw, because if there's part of you that is soft pedaling or downplaying the threat, or it's almost encouraging us not to take this threat seriously, and the most catastrophic thing happens, you are opening the door to a different, not only are you changing history potentially, but you are opening the door to a period of ugliness and danger that you cannot even imagine. And that in part has arisen because people talk about this contest between Trump and Harris in apocalyptic terms that would seem in some ways to justify morally, in the darkest recesses of people's minds, actions against Trump that will prevent him from getting to the presidency, no matter what they might be. And that is a thing. When you start offering that monkey's paw bargain, or the genie offers you, the genie, not the I Dream of Genie, but the genie from 1001 Nights, from Scheherazad's Tales genie, the genie that offers you, that fulfills your wishes and makes everything 10,000 times worse by getting your wish fulfilled. That may be where we are here right now. Okay, so we've kept you long enough, Jonathan Schanzer. You have 19 other things to do. You have your morning podcast. What do you even call it?
Called the FTD Morning Brief, half hour.
The Morning Brief.
Every Monday,
It's
Wednesday,
video.
Friday, half hour. You get all their news and move on with your life.
It's video, it's audio, it's, for all I know, it's, you could, it's Braille. You can enter into it as a hologram, whatever. Very exciting. There every morning for you, the FTD Morning Brief. And also you can find him in the pages of Commentary on the Commentary website as circumstances warrant. We won't be doing a recommendation today. So for Abe and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.